it's Iftach. A while ago, I had the pleasure of giving a workshop in the Brno University of Technology where I got to present my work in the field of ultrasonic recordings. It was a fantastic experience, and ultrasonic recordings is something I've been doing for the past decade or so I thought it's a good time to make a video about it. In this video, I want to take you on a bit of a journey into the world of ultrasound or high-frequency recordings and discuss how it can be used for sound design purposes. And I'm going to talk about the tools and the techniques involved, my motivation, different sound sources, and of course, I'm going to play a lot of examples, so headphones is probably a good idea. So back in 2015, I started experimenting with ultrasound recordings. And my main motivation was the idea that there's a whole world of sound around me that I simply can't hear. Not because it does not exist, just because it's outside my natural hearing range. I guess you all know that us human beings, we hear somewhere between 20 Hz and 20 kHz. Yeah, my personal upper high end is probably way lower because of all the Skinnerbox clubbing days, so your mileage may vary. Even though we can't hear ultrasound directly, we can still capture it and bring it down to our hearing range by recording it with the right equipment and then pitching or slowing it down. This lets us explore textures and details that would be otherwise totally hidden from us. Now, this technique isn't just limited for capturing ultrasound, it's also incredibly useful for sounds that we can hear but cannot fully perceive in their glory and detail because they're just too fast for us. By slowing these sounds down and keeping the resolution high enough for them to remain clear and detailed, we effectively increase their perceived physical size and reveal a whole new world of subtle textures and hidden layers. It's a little bit like zooming in on sound and uncovering details that are normally hidden from us. I'd like to think about it like taking a photo with an insanely high-resolution camera where you capture all these fine details that you might otherwise miss, and then when you zoom in, you see textures and layers that aren't visible at a glance. Slowing down sounds in this way brings out these hidden elements and also make it possible to explore them creatively for sound design purposes. So to capture ultrasound, we first need a microphone that can pick up these really high frequencies, and then we also need a recording device with high enough sampling rate. Ideally, at least double the highest frequency the microphone can capture in order to avoid aliasing. Personally, I started my journey into ultrasound recordings with the Ultrasonic mix. Ultrasonic is a small Italian company that makes ultrasonic microphones, and some of them have integrated converters, which means you can just plug them directly into your phone or computer via USB and start recording. Currently, I'm using the Ultramix 384 EVO, which records in 384 kHz sampling rate and can capture frequencies up to 192 kHz, which is, of course, very impressive. On the plus side, it's very affordable, it's very small, it doesn't require external power, and you can connect it directly to your phone or your computer via USB, so you can just take it everywhere. And there's a very ancient saying that goes, the best ultrasonic microphone that you have is the one that you have on you. So it's really flexible, it's a great tool. On the flip side, and it does have some drawbacks, the gain staging is very tricky because it's not a traditional microphone and it's very sensitive on the high end, and these are things that you cannot monitor directly with your ears. I'll talk about this later. So clipping can occur pretty quickly if you're not careful, and also it's 16-bit only, so the noise floor is pretty high if you're not careful with how you record things. It definitely has its limitations, however it's absolutely possible to make it sound good using modern sound processing techniques such as denoising and EQing and whatever. There are other well-known commercial solutions like the Sunken 100K that can capture up to 100 kHz, and the Sennheiser MKH8060, which goes, I think, up to 50-60 kHz. However, they're all pretty expensive, especially the Sunken, which is also pretty hard to get, I guess. This led me to think about my own DIY solutions, which then led me to develop my own microphones, which kind of strike a balance between high quality, low noise, and extended frequency range. I've built them around the Japanese Primo capsules, which are pretty well known. They have a solid, undocumented range that goes up to 90 kHz. In fact, I even released limited edition batches of these microphones. I know that a lot of you have been asking me if I'm gonna do another batch sometime soon. The answer is that probably sometimes in the very distant future. I can't really tell when because I'm unfortunately very busy with other things and it's a pretty time-consuming thing, so I cannot really commit to anything now. I hope you forgive me for this. So also in addition to that, I found that most field recorders, even the more affordable ones with the onboard mix that record up to 96 kilohertz or higher, can still capture frequencies up to around 40, 48 kilohertz, which is even very useful still for European bats, for example. So these are very valid options that you might even have lying around at home. The thing is that if you're really serious about ultrasonic recordings, I'd recommend working with sampling rates of 192 kilohertz or higher. So the good news is that most sound cards nowadays do support these sampling rates, and things became very affordable, so yeah. When preparing for ultrasound recordings, I like to think about two scenarios. The first is a planned session where we control the conditions and we have a very clear idea of what we're going to record. Typically, this involves the sound source contains audible frequencies, like for example recording a metal object manipulated in some way. We're doing this with the purpose of slowing it down later to reveal hidden details. One thing to keep in mind is that when we pitch sounds down, we also scale up the room that we are recording in. Let's say a room has a natural reverb tail of 100, 150 milliseconds, something you won't necessarily notice in real time. If you slow it down 16 times, you end up with a 2.5 seconds tail, which is very noticeable. So you might want to do this in dry environments. Also, proximity can help reduce the room to signal ratio. So recording up close can be a good idea. The second scenario is ultrasonic field recording, where we're just out capturing sound without planning in advance. This is trickier because, as you know, ultrasound is something we cannot directly hear, so it requires a bit of intuition and patience, but fortunately there's also tools that can help us. One very effective way of dealing with these challenges is using analyzers to visualize these high-frequency sounds in real time. So there's an app called Ultrasonic Analyzer. It's available for iOS and Android, and it pairs really well with the USB Ultrasonic mics. And it's also the only app that I know which supports up to 384 kilohertz. Please do correct me if I'm wrong. In this kind of fieldwork, I often use a hybrid setup. I use my phone and the USB mic to monitor the environment visually, while I record them on a higher quality device using my own mix, which gets me best of both worlds because I get better quality and I know when to record what. So next I want to talk about different types of sound sources and materials which are interesting for ultrasonic and high frequency recordings. Let's talk about metals and how they behave in the ultrasonic range. And this is one of my favorite areas to explore because metals are very, very rich in overtones and harmonics. When we record them at ultrasonic frequencies, we're not only capturing the initial impact, which is most of the times what we hear with smaller objects, we also capture all the subtle vibrations and resonances that occur in the aftermath of the impact, which is a very interesting and beautiful thing to listen to. My first example, and one of my favorite examples, is a 10mm bolt dropped down on a hard surface. If we listen to it at normal speed, it's just this typical short metallic clink that we all know. But when we slow it down 16 times or 4 octaves down, we clearly hear the fundamental. And what's more interesting, that on the second or third iteration, when the ring jumps up and down, we start to hear a perfect fifth. And this is really, really beautiful. And this just adds a whole new layer of musicality and richness to this sound, which is amazing for me. It never ceases to surprise me. So again, this first example is just a great example of how slowing down an ultrasonic recorded sound can reveal hidden complexity that is just not audible in real time. Yeah. The next example is a slowed down recording of a spring dropped into a ceramic bowl. When we slow it down, we really hear how the complexity of the sound starts to unfold, and it sounds like an FM synth. We can hear all the coils of the spring interact in different frequencies and probably also modulate each other, which is really, really cool, and again, would never be interceptable at normal speeds. This is another perfect example of how slowing down ultrasonic recordings can reveal these very, very complex structures, which are otherwise just not interceptable. Next, we have a 10mm serrated washer. Unlike the smooth fundamental tone of the ring we heard before, the washer creates some kind of interesting harmonic ratios. When we slow it down, we hear how the serrations introduce this kind of tonal complexity that give the sound this kind of bellish character, which is very nice. And the last example for the metal section is a needle. When we listen to the recording at a normal speed, it just sounds like a subtle, almost metallic pling, nothing special. But when we slow it down, we start to hear this kind of very interesting, slow, FM-ish pitch modulation. And this is a bit more complex than the simple resonance or the ringing sound of the ring we heard in the beginning, for example. What causes this interesting slow pitch modulation is the shape of the needle, because it's very long and thin. And when we drop it on a hard surface, it vibrates within itself. And this changes the pitch of the sound, which is totally fascinating for me, to be able to hear it. So next, let's listen to wood. Unfortunately, I have only one example, but it's a very nice example nonetheless. It's a toothpick dropped on a hard surface. When we slow it down, we're not just hearing the individual vibrations stretched out, we're also experiencing the way the acoustic properties of the wood are behaving. It's like it resonates and it becomes exaggerated, and it's super interesting. It's like we scale up the object, the higher frequencies fade away, and we begin to hear this fuller, much deeper tone, as if the toothpick somehow grown into a bigger log, which is really, really cool. This is a great example how slowing down recordings can alter our perception of room size or object size, which is something I appreciate very much. I don't want to get too poetic, but I really feel that listening to things in slow motion or zooming in on sound gives me a better understanding of the environment I'm in. So next I want to talk about glass. Glass is very interesting because it introduces this very complex and interesting harmonics when it's being manipulated. So it's also a favorite area of mine to explore. My first example is a smashed light bulb. When we play it 3 octaves down, the initial impact stretches out and reveals this very satisfying attackish sound, which I appreciate very much. And it's followed by this very interesting aftermath of harmonically rich shattered glass, which is very interesting to hear. The next example is me dropping a tiny screw into an old wine glass, and as the screw makes contact with the glass, you can really hear this delicate interaction between the two materials, which I find also very useful sonically and very interesting. Finally, let's listen to a table tennis ball dropped into a small glass espresso cup. Now, even in regular speeds, this is a very interesting sound because the ball accelerates logarithmically, and I really like this kind of rhythm. However, when we slow it down 2 octaves and then 4 octaves later on, we really hear the interaction between the material, and we hear how the pitch actually rises as the ball loses energy and falls down into the glass. This is really cool. So next I want to talk about birds. Birds is a whole area to explore, and also one of my personal favorites. Slowing down birds can reveal an incredible level of complexity quality and musicality that we would just otherwise be unable to perceive. In fact, there's an iconic record from 1987 called The Unknown Music of Birds by Peter Szöke, which was an Hungarian biologist and a musicologist. He even coined the term ornithomusicology, which refers to the study of bird songs as a form of music. When we slow down these sounds, we are able to appreciate them in a whole new light, because they transform from some kind of means of communication to something with a real musical structure. Very often it even feels composed and well thought out. It's simply music. So I would like to start with a recording of a blackbird I captured in a park nearby my home. Already at normal speed, the blackbird song is very melodic and nice, and we can hear some phrases and rhythm, but when we pitch it down 2 octaves, it becomes almost otherworldly. Slowing it down, let us hear all the nuances and the vocal shifts, all these sudden changes in pitch and the way it leaps between notes, and it's just beautiful. And here's another example of a blackbird. Next up is a recording I made of a Eurasian blackcap, and when we pitch it down 2 octaves, it really reveals some fascinating details. It suddenly unfolds into this complex pattern of phrases, which is really, really interesting. Finally, to conclude the bird section, here's a recording I made of 2 cranes in a field somewhere in Brandenburg next to Berlin. It was very, very early morning, and they were actually warning their other crane friends of my presence. This is really fascinating for me because when you pitch it down 2 octaves, it just sounds like the most beautiful, touching, sad brass section bend ever. So next I want to talk about bats. As you probably know, bats use sound or ultrasound for echolocation, and the reason they use ultrasound is because it's very fast. European bats, at least, reach up to 110 kilohertz. So when we slow these recordings down, we can actually hear them. Here are some recordings I made of European bats. What I really appreciate is always these moments when they come closer to objects and you really hear how the rhythm accelerates because the echo is bouncing back faster, and they also make sounds faster in order to measure the distance. This is always a very satisfying moment for me. And here's another recording of bats on a lake with some crickets on the background, and you can hear the 2 types of vocalizations that they have. By the way, bats can get as loud as smoke detectors 10 centimeters from your ear. Fun fact. Which is, again, a reminder to how present this whole invisible world of sound for us is. It's just there and it's really loud. We just can't hear it. Next, I want to play some Nightscapes I recorded in the Mediterranean a couple of years ago. Now, this particular recording starts with what seems like a serene and relaxed evening. You can really hear these typical Mediterranean crickets chirping away. Yeah, but when you slow it down, it becomes this kind of spooky, interesting drone with otherworldly cricket sounds and clicking, and I really love it. I like this transformation of space. Really feels like the shadowverse of this relaxing evening that you have spent in Italy or whatever just turns into this spooky haunted space, which I think is fascinating. Here's another example of crickets which, when played slow down, form this very interesting polyrhythmics. So the next example is a recent recording I did on the Berliner Metro. When played 64 times slower or 6 octaves down, it reveals this cluster of overtones which really forms this very, very interesting and relaxing drone. And this is something I also appreciate very much. Just knowing that this exists when I do this very trivial thing as just going in the metro from point A to point B. And this thing is very loud and is there, but I cannot hear it. And I just imagine myself being able to hear it is something, it's a fact that I appreciate very much.
Speicherstraße. Übergang zu Real.
Finally, my last example for today is a recording of me pouring sparkling water into a glass. So when we slow it down, the fizzling of the water elongates into this textured, shimmering soundscape. I guess it's also the resonance of the glass as the bubbles agitate the water, and the vibrations of the glass are amplified and stretched, and it's a very, very interesting texture to listen to. In fact, it even ended up as an instrument for Ableton Live 12, which was released in the Lost and Found pack, which was included with the release of Live 12 Suite, I believe. Okay, this was my last example. I think it's a pretty beautiful example to illustrate how even the most mundane and banal actions can hold these hidden sonic treasures. And it's also a reminder of how much we miss shifts in our perception in everyday life. And this is why exploring sound in this way is, for me personally, so inspiring. So thank you very much for joining me and listening, and goodbye.